everyone, my name is Courtney and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing all the books that I read in the month of September. Despite school starting up this month, I did end up reading more than just what I was assigned, so I'm happy about that. So first let's go over those 3 books and then we'll get into the rest of the books I read. So the first book I read for my class was The Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri. This is Jhumpa Lahiri's debut collection. This is a literary fiction short story collection. The book follows a host of different characters in different stories. They're not really connected in any way. Almost all of the characters are Indian American or from India, or they're somehow connected to India or an Indian character. I really love this collection. The stories are very tight and concise. She's just a great story writer. If you're looking for a great example of the short story genre, especially domestic literary fiction, this is definitely the way to go. A beautifully written collection, and like everything is flawless, like nothing is out of place. The next collection I read for my class was Drown by Junot Diaz. Junot Diaz is another fiction literary writer. I will say though, in 2016 when the Me Too movement was going on, he was accused of sexual harassment. You know, just know that going in, be aware of that. I personally don't really want to support him, but I couldn't not buy the book and read it for my class, so like there you go. But this is a short story collection and all the stories are following a young Dominican man named Junior. Some of the stories happen in the DR, some of them happen in America. All of these stories are very rife with the culture, with toxic masculinity and like sexism, homophobia, all of those kind of things. To me, where these stories fall short is that they have all those elements but they don't really dig really that deep into them. They're just kind of like a surface environment, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of short stories that do that kind of show you what it's like, give you the context for different cultures where problematic issues are happening, but they don't really like go in deep with them. Different people like different things. Some people think it's too ham-fisted if you discuss those issues. Some people, like me, you know, like them to be a little more tackled. Junot Diaz, he has a particular writing style. He has a particular story format. Objectively, I do think these stories are good, but like I wouldn't necessarily recommend this collection because I do think that there are other writers that have been inspired by him that do the same thing as him. There's so many literary fiction writers out there, so like you can pick up a different one. So I did not give this a star rating because I just didn't feel like it was appropriate. And then the last collection I read for class was Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self by Danielle Evans. This is also a debut collection. All of the short story collections that we read for the first third of semester were debuts, and I really love this. All these short stories for the most part follow teen girls or young women, and I really love that exploration of like young adult adolescence. Some of the stories do follow older protagonists, but you know, it's still on the younger side. This collection has domestic issues, but it also has a lot of social commentary, a lot of discussions of sexuality and race and being a woman in our society. I really love this collection. It was really good to me. Just so many instances like just like hit me in the heart really hard. Most of these stories, all of these stories do not end happily, and like bittersweetness at the end of every story was just like a gut punch. So I ended up giving this a 4.5 stars. I really like this collection. It wasn't as well written as Jhumpa Lahiri's collection, and I don't think the stories were as tight, but like they just hit me more impactfully because it wasn't so focused on like domestic romantic partner life. I think I really love this collection. It was really great. The next book I have on here is Ray Bear by Jordan Ifuko. I started this book in August and I finished it up in the beginning of September. This is like an Afrofuture fantasy type story, and it follows a wide cast of characters. The main protagonist is a young girl named Terry Sai. The main exploration of this book is like the idea of like destiny and how much power and control you have over it. I just really liked how a lot of really typical royalty fantasy tropes were very pushed in this book. I really liked the subversion of expectations. It was a really phenomenal read, and I gave this a 4 stars. I'm definitely looking forward to the next book in this series because I love this one. Another book I read this month was Earthc, or The Wizard of Earthc by Ursula Le Guin. This is the first book in a companion fantasy series, I believe. This fantasy book was written in the 60s, so it's definitely a lot older, and I think that kind of older fantasy style is reflected in here. And what I mean by that is that when you read Tolkien, a lot of older fantasy books, it has that more fable-esque narrative writing style, it's more summary based. Even if there are connected events, it feels more episodic somehow, and you're kind of at a distance from the characters and their internal state. So going into that book with all of those writing choices and styles, I think like this is not as immediate as like some newer fantasy novels that I'm like used to. I do think that this book and its writing style is still very accessible. You're just not as close to the characters, so it's easy and accessible to read, but it's different than like what you're used to if you read only contemporary fantasy. But I still really liked this book. I liked the tropes that it explored. Ursula Le Guin is like known as one of the queens of fantasy, one of the first people in the genre. She has a world that is very different than what you would suppose it to be. Like, it's definitely like medieval, but it's definitely not like medieval Europe. Even the idea of good versus evil is kind of turned over on its head in this book, so I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving it a 3.5 stars. I do look forward to the rest of the series because I do think these books are really enjoyable. The next book I read was On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden. This is a graphic novel, chunky graphic novel, and it is a sci-fi fantasy in space saga following this young girl through her past and then her present. There's spaceships, there's crews, but it's definitely a much quieter sci-fi fantasy story than like you would expect from your typical like space opera type thing. It's definitely not that. It's a very quiet story about this one young woman, but that's not to say that there isn't adventure action in this series. There definitely is. This book is also very sapphic and I love that. And I also like the art style. It kind of has this simplistic art style, like different colors to show the moods and everything, and I think it's stunning. It just really appeals to me, and I would really recommend this. I really love this. I think I gave it a 4 stars. It was really good. And then the last book I read this month was The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. This is one of the books that I've had the longest on my TBR. I've meant to read it for a very long time. I ended up getting this on audiobook so that I could get through it, and I'm really glad I did because the audiobook is very interesting with the stuff that's happening in the story. The Knife of Never Letting Go is like fantasy, sci-fi again, dystopian, utopian. It's like somewhere in that weird genre. But in this world, our main character, Todd, he lives in a town where everybody can hear everybody's thoughts, and the book kind of starts out when Todd finds not only a woman, which isn't supposed to exist, and he finds a pocket of silence. So yes, it's very intriguing. This is very fast-paced, high stakes. It kind of has like a Wild West settler type vibe to it, which I really wasn't expecting, but I really enjoyed. I love like survival, settler, pioneer kind of era stuff. So this was really interesting to see that mixed in with like a dystopian fantasy sci-fi world. The only thing I will say that I didn't love about this book is that it is kind of a slog. There are several climaxes where you think that you're finally at the end of the book, but no, there's still 100 pages to go. It sometimes feels like, you know, like why can't we just get to the climax? Especially because a lot of the climactic events that are happening at the end of the book all kind of parallel or very similar events to each other, so it's just like, can't we just get to the end? And then the other thing that I'm very cautious about, basically in this world, men's thoughts are projected, and then I don't want to reveal too much, but basically he finds a girl, and that girl is a pocket of silence. Women can hear thoughts, but women can't project thoughts. Any kind of like sci-fi fantasy element, superpower, disease type thing that like relies or hinges on gender, specifically like what sex you're born at, like makes me a little uneasy. I know this book was written like 10 years ago, but like trans people still existed back then, so like how do they fit into this world? Will they ever be explored? Will my questions about that be answered? I don't know, probably not. So like that's my only one thing, is that when you make something about gender, like you have to discuss gender, which I don't know if this book will really do. It kind of hints at topics of like toxic masculinity and misogyny, but it's not at least talked about that much in this first book. I'm a little cautious about the next 2 books. Despite all of those things, I did really enjoy this book. I gave it a 3.5 stars. It was good, but I didn't love it. But yeah, those are all the books that I read in the month of September. Let me know what you read, what your favorite books were this month down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.